I'm Mary Aileen Buss. I'm a librarian here at Long Beach Public Library, and today I'm going to be showing you faux marble painting. Let me move my webcam over. There's a number of things called marbling. None of them are what I'm doing today. What I'm doing is actually painting wood to look like it's made out of marble. This is a box I did a couple of years ago. This one had a little bit of problems because the gloss I used at the end turned brown, but you can see that it's made so that it's all the way around. I've done candlesticks that I don't have an example of. You can do picture frames. I learned this from a little workshop I took a few years ago from a set designer for some of the major theaters in the DC area, Wolf Trap and some of the others. So she started us with blue, which is what I'm going to do for you today to start with. If we have time, we'll get to a green as well. So it's plain wood. The first step is to paint it white as a base coat. That's just boring, plain painting white. I did it already to save time here. So what we do is we're using blue and white acrylic. This is fairly good quality stuff, Artist Loft. You can use the cheap stuff too. I'll be doing that a little later if we get to it. So I start off with just painting some streaks at an angle. They all have to be at the same angle. You need to go all the way, dab on lots of paint, nice and thick. You need to get at least one corner and make sure you're going all the way to the edge. That should do it. And then we'll get some white. And I will dab on streaks of the white in between the blue. Now I probably shouldn't be doing quite so completely diagonal as I am here. It's better to do it at an oblique angle, but this is the way I started, so this is the way I'm going to go. As you can see, I've got a fairly light blue here, but not completely pastel. Let me see what the name of this is. Just called light blue. Okay, so I've got that on, and then I take a nice wide brush and I just smear it all together. You always work in the same angle as your original strokes, and you're just blending it all together, the white and the light blue, so that it becomes fairly uniform, but it's got streaks in it. It's not just a solid color, it's sort of textured. And I had more white than I had blue, so I'm winding up with white streaks. So I don't want to do that. So I just have to keep working over it until it's all blended together and sort of textured. Now, this takes at least 45 minutes to dry between steps. So I can't continue on with this one. Instead, I've got another one that's already at that stage. This one I managed to do, instead of straight diagonals, a slightly more oblique angle. You don't want to go straight across because that looks too deliberate. So for our next stage, let me rinse off my hands a little bit. Here. And I can put those two brushes in the water. I've got a mason jar full of water here. The acrylic does wash out of the brushes pretty well if you do it as soon as you finish, but you want to put it in the water first. And it'll wash off your hands pretty well too if you do it straight away. Now the next step is we need to put veins on. And I forgot the black paint. I will be right back. So for the next step, for the veins, we use black paint, and we don't need very much, just a little dab. And for this, you don't want your veins to look too regular because that winds up looking wrong. If you ever look at marble, it's got the veins stop and start and branch and disappear. The best thing for that is a feather. I got these at Michael's. It's pretty cheap for a bag of these. Any kind of feather should work. Now this one's got a tip on it. It's going to be a problem. So you just dip it in. You work in the same diagonal as your original paint. And you just sort of, whoops, I didn't want that big smear there. That's a bit of a problem, but you sort of turn the feather around as you go. You can stop and start. Again, you want to come all the way to the edge. You can branch some out. In and out. You need to resist the temptation to do too much veining. It's the #1 mistake that I make, that everybody makes. The first thing I did in that workshop did not look very much like marble because I did too many veins. My instructor recommended taking a little bit of water on a brush and sort of letting some of this smear out a little bit. I don't usually do that because it winds up making a big mess usually, but I'll do a little bit on that right now. Just a little bit, not too much. Okay, and that big blob there is a problem, but there's not much I can do about it. If you make a major mistake at any stage, you wait till it dries and you paint it over and start over. Only thing you've lost is some time. Okay, so I've got some veining there. It's not too bad. My angle wasn't quite right. I'm cutting across it instead of with it, but it's not too bad. Let's see, let me lay that out. So here's another one that I did some veining. I did a somewhat better job on this one. The next step is marble is not, the veins sort of disappear a little bit or they fade out. So the way you simulate that is you overpaint it with a mix of, I should have done the blue, not the white. And I didn't bring it, brought the wrong stuff. This is a 4-to-1 mix of white. And I would have done better of white paint and water. And I would have done better to grab the 4-to-1 mix of the blue paint and water. And it does settle out as you leave it standing here over time. So you have to stir it. And I'm just going to put a little bit of this over some of these thicker bits of the veins. And the white's wrong. It would be better with blue, but we'll manage. And I'll just spread it out. So what we're doing is we're fading out some of the bits of veins. And again, you don't want to do much. I just did a few little bits. And let me see if I can blot out some of this white here so that it doesn't look quite so. Yeah, that's better. So it faded out some of the black a little bit, so it's not quite so stark. So for the next one, this one's been faded already. And I used blue here, and I didn't quite get it right. You can see some darker blue bits, which isn't what we wanted. The next step is marble actually has little flecks of specks of a darker color in it. So we're going to simulate that by using, this is black paint with water in a 7-to-1 ratio. And you can see this one settles out a lot. So I definitely need to stir this a lot. Let me get this stirred until I've got it fairly uniform. I guess the paint's lighter than the water, and that's why it comes up on the top like that. Okay, that should do it. And this trash can I've got over here has a plastic bag in it because there's no way I'm putting wet stirrers and feather in my regular trash can. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to take a brush and I'm going to put some of this paint across it. This paint and water mix, not too much, just a little bit. I think this stage is called pickling. is the name I found for it when I was looking up exactly the proportions, because I didn't remember what the instructor in that workshop had said. And now I'm going to take some fairly stiff paper. You can use typing paper or copy paper for this. This is the stuff they wrap around glasses or dishes when you buy them in a store. And you sort of crumple it up and have not flat edges, but the irregular edges, and you just start stamping around. You make sure you go at different angles, because if you do it at the same angle all the way across, it actually looks too regular. You won't notice it consciously, but you will unconsciously. And we just sort of stamp that across, and you kind of almost can't see it, but it's got a slight mottled appearance that makes it more authentic looking. So your last step, marble is also kind of shiny. So your very last step is you put on a clear glaze or clear gloss. Now, as I said when I showed you that box, lots of white. When I showed you that box, you have to be careful you won't get one that won't change color. So what I've got is Liquitex brand is very good. This is glazing medium, it's called. Or for a birdhouse I did for outside, this is Liquitex gloss varnish. And I'm not going to actually do either one of them now because they take 24 hours to dry completely, and I'd like to be able to put them away. So here's one that I did the whole process, including a gloss. So it's kind of shiny. And here's another one. Looks fairly authentically like marble. This one I kind of got too many veins in. This one's kind of better, but then it's at a diagonal. So you can do a lot of colors. I showed you the white. White's kind of tricky to get the second color on. I used gray as the second color with this, and it's too dark. I would have done better to use cream, I think. But you can't do just white or it'll be too flat. It needs a second color. For a darker color, because marble comes in black and dark green, you need a different technique to start with. The stripe technique just doesn't look right. So I experimented with a bunch of colors I looked up online, and if you look up how you do marble painting on walls, they want you to sponge 3 colors on, and then they don't do the veins, it's just the marbling. So what I found is 3 greens. This is more of this Artist Loft. This is deep green. So here, let me get my pile of greens out. So with the dark green, with the dark color, I did the background paint in black. And I'm going to lay that out. I'm going to have trouble finding places to put all of these. So I've got this deep green, and these other 2, these are a much cheaper paint, and it's much more liquid, which can be a little bit of a problem when you're doing 3 of them. But you put them down very close to each other. I have to shake them because they separate if they've been sitting there for a while. You put them down fairly close to each other. And you take a sponge. You can't, and you get it all over your fingers. You can't use this kind of sponge on a stick. I tried it, and it all comes out round, completely unnatural. So what you do is you get a sponge, and you put it down so that it's picking up all 3 colors, and you just sort of start to stamp here. And again, you have, like with the pickling, you have to sort of turn the sponge around as you go so that it doesn't all wind up the same. What I've got here is that deep green and a grass green and a Spanish olive, which looks kind of sage to me. Now the olive is pretty light and you don't really want to wind up with a lot showing. So you have to make sure you cover that over pretty well, but it adds just that nice touch of 3rd color. I tried green and black and it was just way too dark. The black completely overpowers. I tried a lighter mint green instead of the sage. I tried all kinds of greens. And this is what came out the best. If you remember the circulation desk at the library, the countertops there are green marble. And that's what I took as my guide for how I wanted this to look. And I just, this is getting there. It needs a little more of the darker greens to cover up that olive a little better, because you just want a hint of the olive coming through. And the black behind it just means that if any shows through, well, you've got a little bit of the very dark there. Okay, so I think that's right. And it's just all variegated with the different greens. It'll dry fairly dark and it should work well. So this one I did like that. It's ready for the veining now. And the green marble gets white veins. So I put some of that down. And again, I use a feather to vein. Now this doesn't have a particular line to it already, but you want to keep your veining all in pretty much the same line instead of going, you know, crossways or something, because the natural veins run across. The other thing with the veining is you need to resist the temptation to just make a whole bunch of parallel lines from one side to the other, because again, that looks completely unnatural. And I'm getting too much veining on here because that's my weakness. So we've got the veining, and I'll lay that one aside. If I can find a space for it. And so this one here is already veined. I did a better job on this. I didn't get too much, but still I'm going to fade some out. And this is 4:1 green, dark green with water. And I get the top off and I stir it vigorously to make sure it's mixed well, because it does settle. Now, I've got a card table under this and a plastic tablecloth on top, because you will get paint all the way around the edges, particularly with the sponging on the dark colors. But even just anyway, on the lighter colors, you wind up with paint around the edge. You can use newspaper. The trouble with newspaper is paint then sticks to the newspaper. So when you pick your piece up, it's got newspaper, shreds of newspaper sticking to it around the edges. And that's not the look you want. Why did I put that away? I need to use that. Okay. So I'm going to take another little brush and dip it in. And I don't need to do much fading here, but this line, this bit right here is kind of dark. And this here, and I'm just going to fade out a little bit in the middle. And I think that does it on this one. That one didn't need very much. So actually working on it obviously isn't taking very long, but that drying in between each step means it can take you a couple of days total to do one. So this one's already faded out. You can see a little bit of green over the white there and here, and it just needs the pickle stage. So for this one, it's dark, so we pickle it with a light color. This is white paint and water in a 7:1 ratio. That's 7 parts water and 1 part paint. So very little paint, because you don't want it to show that much. It needs to be very subtle. So take another brush here. I'll use the big one for this. And we stroke it over. This one you can sort of see the white beading up a little bit on it, which is fine. And I put the top on. And I grab another piece of that good stiff paper and crumple it up and make sure I've got the end here and not one of the flat sides. And I stamp around over, making sure I turn the thing repeatedly so that I don't wind up all the same angle on those really subtle white specks. So again, you really can't see it consciously, but it is there. It does give it a little more visual interest. And then you do the same glaze on this so that it's a bit shiny, or this one, a bit shiny. And if you're doing something like a box, of course, you want to make sure that you wind up with your veins going across so that when it's closed, it looks like it might be a solid, carved out of a solid block of marble. And your outside up here to the inside. And as I said, the glaze on here turned brown. It wasn't supposed to. It claimed it wouldn't, but it did. Okay, so that didn't take long. That's what I have to show today. Any questions?
Oh, look good to me.
Okay. And you can use, like it's acrylic paint. I was buying, as I said, the fairly high quality stuff, but this little cheap stuff, this came from Michael's. It comes in a million colors. It was $2 a bottle, I think. $1.50 a bottle, something like that. It's pretty cheap. And you don't use very much of it, so you can use it for a lot of the same bottles for a number of different projects.